You mentioned tax reform. That's one way we can get the economy going and bring back some jobs and increase wages. Regulatory reform is another one. There's so much opportunity there. So I think people were looking for something new, and that's what the Congress and the new administration has got to do now.
You also are reaching out. I saw in the notes that you think maybe Democrats are going to want to be active as well in whatever the government's doing. But it'd be nice, I guess, but it's not necessary, is it?
Well, it would be good in the Senate, because in the Senate you need 60 votes to do most anything. There are a couple of exceptions to that. One is this Congressional Review Act, where we can actually look at some existing regulations and send them to the president. Hopefully he'll sign some of those changes. And then second, under the budget, you can do some things with regard to tax reform under what's called reconciliation. So there's some exceptions to it, but I think on tax reform, there's a chance we could make this bipartisan. There's a sense right now that too many jobs are going overseas, investments going overseas. The code is clearly broken, the highest corporate tax rate in the world, and it's affecting workers. And that's where I think you can see a lot of consensus between Republicans and Democrats.
But you're ready to play hardball there. You can do reconciliation with tax reform. I mean, no one was nice to you 8 years ago with Obamacare. They didn't say, gee, it'd be nice to bring you along. Why would, tit for tat?
Well, reconciliation is a way to do it. You're right. It's kind of a fancy word for being able to do it with 50 votes instead of 60, but it also, as you know, is limited to a 10-year period. And we saw this with the Bush tax cuts, that we had to, after 10 years, go through a painful process of trying to renew some of them. So what you want to do is put permanent changes into law, and particularly on the international side, I think it's important for us to provide some predictability and certainty. So let's see what we can do. And if it's impossible to do it under regular order, then there is this other option under the budget reconciliation.
Senator, you spoke earlier about the opportunity to reduce regulation, reform regulation in certain areas. You're also on the Senate Finance Committee. Specifically, what do you want to see within that sector in terms of changing regulation?
Well, there's a broad swath now. If you look at the environmental regulations and some of the finance regulations that have come out of Dodd-Frank, if you look at what the Department of Labor is doing in terms of the fiduciary rule, there are some opportunities here. One, to take some of the regulations that are in the pipeline and actually by executive action deal with those, hopefully slow some down. Others, stop them altogether and start over again. And then ones that have already been passed, say waters of the U.S., there's an opportunity for us to be sure that we're using this Congressional Review Act appropriately to begin to change those. And then finally, and this is the one I think that's actually the most interesting, change the structure and the process of regulations. Require real cost benefit analysis and the least burdensome alternative to get to an objective. Actually force the independent agencies to live under the rules that the executive branch agencies have to live under in terms of looking at the costs and the benefits.
Yeah.
That would be a huge change, and that would be a statutory change going forward, not just for this administration, but for future administrations. And I think that'll make a huge difference in terms of economic growth.
A lot of establishment Republicans, when the win happened, said, great, Paul Ryan's got a whole legislative agenda ready to go. I mean, the bills are written. Healthcare reform, for example, all that stuff is just ready to go. Is there inevitably going to be some disappointment among Republicans if Donald Trump doesn't want to go along with that whole program? I mean, do you have any sense yet of just how much of that's going to happen and how much he's going to want to tinker around the edges, or right in the middle of it?
Michelle, I'm optimistic so far, both because of what the president-elect's been saying and also because of the fact, as you say, there is this agenda that's been laid out called the Better Way. So I think we have actually the ability to work together. There'll be some give and take. I mean, look, there always is, and Republicans and Democrats alike are going to want to get their point of view but included in the process. But I think there's an opportunity here to get some things done on the big questions, how to get the economy moving, how to deal with the middle class squeeze, not just getting wages up, but dealing with the expense side, particularly, as you say, the Affordable Care Act and the skyrocketing costs of health care for small businesses, for families. And then with regard to regulations and taxes, as I talked about, I think there's a real shot here to get something done that'll actually help move the needle. So I'm hopeful, but you're right, there'll be some give and take, and that's what, the democratic process is all about.
You've had